the greatest concern I have is as the Russians advance and really end this conflict and demonstrate conclusively that there's nothing we can do about it, that there will be great pressure in Washington to quote unquote employ a nuclear weapon. You know, this business with the hypersonic missile, this Oreshnik, is a product of decades of research, development, and investment. This all began in the 70s and the early 80s under Marshal Garkov. He was seeking alternatives to the use of nuclear weapons. Remember, he was the commander-in-chief of Soviet rocket forces and then became the chief of what we would call today probably the Great General Staff. He wanted something other than nuclear weapons. Well, this developed and it evolved, and that's where we are today. And one of his disciples is Macgregor, a colonel general, very brilliant man, wrote several books. And he made it very clear that we could wage war, that is, the Russians could wage war without reliance on nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons were ultimately self-defeating because they were poisonous and too destructive. The missile that you saw is now the answer. There is an arsenal of those missiles waiting to be launched. This is not a one-off. This is not just a few experimental missiles. And this is the problem, that once it becomes clear we have nothing with which to respond, that some damn fool is going to say, well, let's use a low-yield nuclear warhead on the assumption, well, that won't start a major war. And again, the Russians are prepared. Their nuclear forces are on high alert. They're ready to fight, whether you fight on the tactical, conventional level, operational, conventional, or strategic nuclear. They're ready for it all. They're ready to attack and respond. This is the time for President Trump to tell everyone that's working for him to shut up. And he should take the mic and he should say, number one, I didn't start this war. I don't want this war. And I want to end this war. Period. And any further discussion of this until I am in office is counterproductive. And I will talk directly to President Putin and we will find a solution and bring this tragic war to a close. I think he should do some other things. I think he should suspend all aid immediately and stop this mass destruction and annihilation of the Ukrainian people by their own government. He should suspend all that aid, and then he should withdraw all U.S. personnel from Ukraine in and out of uniform, whether they're intelligence operatives or anything else, all U.S. citizens out. Do those things, and that will signal to the Russians that we are very serious, and then they will take us seriously. But right now, with Vice Admiral, whatever his name was, at Strategic Strike Command, saying ridiculous things about our readiness to engage in nuclear war, or somebody like Gorka, newly announced radio personality speaking for the president, scary thought, or Waltz talking about no daylight between him and
Jake Sullivan.
Good Lord. I mean, why did we all flock to the polls and vote for President Trump?
Yeah, we needed some daylight there.
We might as well bail out of this election and start over.
Yeah, the real problem that we're in right now, Doug, is it's getting increasingly difficult to get to January 20th when Trump could issue orders to the extent that you're talking about here. And those headlines that Gary was showing just illustrate the danger here, because apparently the Biden administration has continued to give authorization to use long-range weapons even after the Oreshnik SS, and now then Russia is saying that they're going to respond already. And I fear that this is actually going to lead to an escalation. But then you have knuckleheads like General David Petraeus, which I don't know why anyone still listens to him, said this yesterday.
I don't think we're on the cusp of World War III, but the risks are enormous. I think we face the greatest number of challenges and risks, at least since the end of the Cold War, if not since the end of World War II. And one of those is the most complex we've had, and that is, of course, the U.S. and Western relationship with China. What we have to do is remember that the elements of deterrence, and of course what we're trying to do in many of these cases, particularly in the case with China, is to deter something that we don't want to see develop because it could lead to actual conflict. The relationship is described by the U.S. National Security Advisor as one of intense rivalry. intense competition. And we want to make sure that intense competition doesn't turn into actual confrontation. The way you do that is deterrence. Deterrence rests on a potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities on the one hand and your willingness to use them on the other.
Okay, so he's kind of right in the last part there, where he's saying that, deterrence is based on an accurate understanding of your adversary's capabilities and your willingness to do here. But if by that calculation, according to what you just said, we should not be trying to provoke them further.
No, obviously not. Historically, the United States has never had any vital strategic interest in eastern Ukraine, or for that matter, in Ukraine. Our interests always ended at the border of NATO, at least for the last 80 years, and we keep pushing it further east, which has brought us into conflict with Russia. Something with which Putin and his government have tried for 15 years to avoid. We have continued to push, and provoke. Now we've got the war. We're not in a good position. We're not capable or available to fight for much of anything. We're provoking another war down in the Middle East. These two wars can no longer be viewed separately. What you do to the Russians in Ukraine to obstruct them or to harm them is going to redound to our disadvantage in the Middle East. That is assuming that anyone wants to avoid a war involving Israel and the United States against virtually everyone in the region, plus Russia and China and others. This is mindless. This is stupid, and it's not going to work. It's going to fail miserably, but we're back to where we started. How can any of these people that have made ridiculous statements for so long retreat from these bad policy positions? Their egos won't permit it, and their ego is much more important than the interests of the United States and the American people.
Yeah, apparently it is to them. Now, one development that might be at least eking in the right direction is there was a report out just this morning produced by Julian Rupke, who's a German writer and researcher that has been covering the Russia-Ukraine war really from the beginning. He is avowedly pro-Ukrainian. He likes their side. He's been for them the whole time. I think he has a little Ukrainian flag on his X account. But he's also one of the most honest guys out there. And when the Ukraine side hasn't been doing good, he's talked about it. Well, he had a report out that had several important elements today, which will show from a pro-Ukraine side, things are not going the way Jake Sullivan and some of these other people claim, or that Biden thinks that they actually have a shot, etc. Let's take a look at Rupke, because he's talking about some views that are not shared very widely on the West about what's happening on the southern part of the Eastern Front.
However, it only reached about 12 kilometers that took around 3 months to fight for from the Ukrainian side at the time, and 12 kilometers that Russia has now covered in just 1 week. Towards Velikonovostika, we are looking at footage that shows us the Russian army is just outside the city. And these are the recordings that Russian bloggers have published. And we can clearly see the Russian tanks down here. These are 3 armored vehicles moving forward in the direction of the last line of defense before they reach the city, specifically towards that industrial facility standing here. And in the background, it is quite clear you can see the buildings of Velikonovosilka, which have long been a vital retreat point for the Ukrainian army, from where numerous attempts were made to advance last year, ever since the front has come to a halt there. And it has been roughly around 5 days in total. 5 days in which Russia managed to successfully capture an area measuring 70 square kilometers here and break through the Ukrainian front on a width of about 13 kilometers.
That was so important, because just before that clip there started, he was talking about how much territory the Ukraine side captured in their 2023 full-scale offensive, which started around Velikonovosilka and had moved 12 kilometers in 3 months and never went any further. And now he says that the Russians are advancing so fast, as we talked, they got that in 5 days. And of course, it's continuing to roll on. So based on that acceleration in the southern part, do you see any reason to think that Russia is going to slow down now?
Oh, of course not. In fact, the more we talk about what we will try to do in negotiating with the Russians in terms of forcing them or pushing them into some corner that we want, the more likely we're to see this end. Remember, the Russians were quite content to sit on most of the territory that they were interested in where Russian-speaking people lived for quite a while, and the Ukrainians obliged them by impaling themselves on defenses they could never penetrate, and losing we think now, over 600,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers, a total of probably 1.5 million casualties overall. I mean, these are World War I scale numbers, as we've discussed before. It's a no-win scenario for Ukraine, and the Russians have not been in any hurry. But now we know they are building up for a massive undertaking. I suspect that will be designed to end this conflict on their terms. And what are we going to do? Are we going to escalate to the nuclear level? Somebody mentioned recently on some show or some event somewhere that we would consider giving the Ukrainians nuclear weapons. That is Zelensky. I don't really see this any longer as Ukrainian. It's just the Zelensky regime, a nuclear weapon. Well, you'd have to be insane to do such a thing.